we're in the last chapter of the book of Ruth today. We're almost finished with an entire book of the Bible. Can you believe that? The next one that we're doing will take much longer, though, so. Which will start in 2 weeks. So, recap. The past 3 Sundays, we've gone from Bethlehem to Moab, Moab back to Bethlehem. We've had Elimelech, Mahlon, and Chilion go to Bethlehem, from Bethlehem to Moab, and then die in Moab. And then Naomi came back to Bethlehem with her daughter-in-law Ruth as widows, and God was going to provide for them. Ruth goes out into the field, starts going after the grain that's fallen off of the people that are harvesting the grain, and it turns out to be the fields of Boaz, who is a Kinsman Redeemer, a very close relative. And last week we saw Ruth go into Boaz as he's winnowing the barley harvest, and asked him to be their kinsman redeemer and to redeem both the land that Elimelech lost and also her, to take me under your wing. And so, as we left last week, we had Boaz telling Ruth that, yes, I am a close relative, I am a kinsman redeemer, but there is somebody that's closer. And so I'm going to go into the city, and I'm not going to sleep until we get this settled one way or another. And if he can do it, then great. If not, I will take care of you. So either way, God was going to provide, and Boaz was going to work that whole day to make sure that this was taken care of. Ruth went back to Naomi and told her all the things that's going to happen, and Naomi concludes chapter 3 by saying, "Then she said, 'Sit still, my daughter, until you know how this matter will turn out, for the man will not rest until he has concluded the matter this day.'" So that's where we left, hanging in the balance. Is it going to be Ruth and Boaz, or is it going to be Ruth and this other person? Who's it going to be? So we begin in chapter 4 as the action continues. So this is Ruth chapter 4. "Now Boaz went up to the gate and sat down there, and behold, a close relative of whom Boaz had spoken came by. So Boaz said, 'Come aside, friend, sit down here.' So he came aside and sat down." So there's a lot of things that are happening in this particular chapter. So as we're in chapter 4, Boaz is going to the city gate. Now the city gate is, in these particular times, is a central location, a central meeting area. If you needed to go to the field, so if Boaz was actually going out to the field again, or his workers were going out to the field, or if he was going to the threshing floor, you would have to go through this particular gate. It's also the area where people from other cities would come in. This is basically the only place that you can go in or out of the city. It's protection. And it was also a marketplace area, so there'd probably be a lot more crowds, but if you're going to track somebody down, this is the place you're going to find them. This is going to be the place. So this is an Israeli structure. This is actually a Canaanite structure. And this would have been, you can see this archway, this has been covered up, but this would have been sort of the entranceway into this particular city. This is in northern Israel. And this particular structure is actually from the time of Abraham, and it's possible Abraham saw this particular structure. But this is a Canaanite structure, this is a Canaanite city gate, and here's like a video.
Canaanite building.
But it's actually a gate. And it's covered up to protect it from erosion and everything. But this is sort of what the kind of city might have looked like at the time. Another example, this is another way. See how this sort of narrows here? This is the entrance going into this particular area. This is not Bethlehem. Bethlehem's changed quite a bit from the picture you've seen. This is from Megiddo. This is from the valley of Megiddo, and the town of Megiddo. And so these are the structures. You can see how it sort of winds through here. This is sort of how the city gate was in this particular time. So this is where Boaz is going. This is what the sort of the location probably looked like at the time of Ruth. So it's a very a very central location. People would be going in and out of the city. Boaz knew that he'd be able to track down this particular relative. He'd have to go through these particular gates. And so you could think of this sort of like as a social networking place. It's not Facebook, it's not anything, but it's a social place for people to go in and out. So, and also this is where the elders would be. This would be the elders of the city. So it's a central location. And this is where also all the legal transactions would take place. Not necessarily a court, so when we get a little bit further in this chapter, don't think of it as like a trial by jury kind of thing, but more of, think of it as like a public notoriety, like a public notary, where they would do something. So this is that same kind of thing. The elders would sort of be the notary of this particular transaction. So Boaz goes to goes there, and the close relative stops by. So we see there the close relative of whom Boaz had spoken came by. So he said, "Come aside, friend, sit down here." So he came aside and sat down. Now, this is interesting. If you have other translations, it might say something else. But in mine it says, "Come aside, friend." And it's interesting, in the actual Hebrew, it literally means so-and-so. Come aside, so-and-so. Come aside, Mr. So-and-so. And it's the narrator of this story is doing this. That's, Boaz knows who this person is. It's not so-and-so. His name isn't so-and-so. It's not like it's Al so-and-so or Edwin so-and-so or, something like that. It's Boaz would have used this person's name, but the narrator of the story doesn't think it important enough to actually include what his name is, which should give you sort of an indication of what's going to transpire in the story. If his name really doesn't mean anything in the story, then what's going to happen? So it's sort of a foreshadowing of what's going to happen. So he takes the Kinsman Redeemer, and he needs witnesses. So as we go on in this chapter, he says, "So he took 10 men of the elders of the city and said, 'Sit down here.' So they sat down. Then he said to the close relative, 'Naomi, who has come back from the country of Moab, sold a piece of land which belonged to our brother Elimelech. And I thought to inform you, saying, buy it back in the presence of all the inhabitants and the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, redeem it. But if you will not redeem it, then tell me that I may know. For there is no one but you to redeem it, and I am next after you.' And he said, 'I will redeem it.'" So we have Boaz pulling in 10 other men, and there's probably a crowd coming around as well, because this is the marketplace, so there's probably more than just the 12 of them there. There's probably several more. So he's saying, the other witnesses that are going to be around here, not just the 10 elders, but the other people. So in the assembly, the inhabitants and the elders, this is the situation. Naomi and her husband and their 2 sons, they went to Moab. Naomi's the only one that came back with Ruth. He doesn't mention Ruth in this context, but they came back. The land needs to be redeemed, and will you be willing to do it? Now this goes back to Deuteronomy. So if you'd like to turn over to Deuteronomy, this is the 5th book in the Bible: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. And chapter 25. Deuteronomy 25 and verses 5 through 10. Deuteronomy 25 verses 5 through 10. "If brothers dwell together, and one of them dies and has no son, the widow of the dead man shall not be married to a stranger outside the family. Her husband's brother shall go into her, take her as his wife, and perform the duty of a husband's brother to her. And it shall be that the firstborn son which she bears will succeed in the name of the dead brother, that his name may not be blotted out of Israel. But if the man does not want to take his brother's wife, then let his brother's wife go up to the gate of the elders and say, my husband's brother refuses to raise up a name to his brother in Israel. He will not perform the duty of my husband's brother. Then the elders of the city shall call him and speak to him, but if he stands firm and says, I will not take her, then the brother's wife shall come to him in the presence of the elders, remove his sandal from his foot, spit it on his face, and answer and say, so shall it be done to the man who will not build up his father's house, and his name shall be called in Israel the house of him who had his sandal removed. Now, as we get into this story, there's going to be some similar imageries as well, but it's going to be slightly different than what was happening in Deuteronomy. But basically, Boaz is coming to the elders, coming to the other kinsmen, and he says, we have to take care of Naomi one way or another. It's either going to be you, and if you don't want to do it, then I'll take care of it. So he goes up there and he presents this whole legal case. The land's been sold, it belonged to Elimelech, buy it back. Do it in the presence of the elders here, and redeem it. And we see this word used several times, the word redeemed. It has the idea of deliverance, to avenge. And so he's asking him, be an avenger. Maybe not like Iron Man or Spider-Man or anything like that, but to be an avenger, to avenge the land, to redeem it. And he says, if you are willing, and if not, let me know, and I will do it. And so we have the kinsman saying, I will redeem it. All right, so you think, there's the game over, yep, so Ruth's going to end up with this guy. No, hold up. No, that's not how that's not how it's gonna be. So Boaz brings up the one stipulation that goes along with this. So going on in verse 5, it says, then Boaz said, on the day you buy the field from the hand of Naomi, you must also buy it from Ruth, the Moabitess, the wife of the dead, to perpetuate the name of the dead through inheritance. So there's the stipulation. So, you'll get the land, but also if you redeem it, you also have to take Ruth to perpetuate the line of Elimelech. And it literally means in the Hebrew to raise up, to produce an heir. It's an heir-raising situation. And so here's the whole deal now, as it lays. He has to redeem the land, redeem Ruth, and raise up an heir that would continue on the line, going back to that passage in Deuteronomy talking about so that the name is not blotted out of Israel. So it's to continue that family line so it doesn't get wiped out. During World War II, and they actually made a movie about it called Saving Private Ryan, there was a law that was enacted because there was 3 boys that were on the exact same ship in World War II, and that ship sank, and all 3 of them were killed. And so there was a law that was passed that if all these siblings were dead except for one, then they would go in and rescue that one and bring it back home so that the family name would continue. Similar kind of thing that God set up here was continue the family name, pass the family line down. So Boaz lays it out there saying, redeem the land, redeem Ruth, and raise up an heir so that the name is not blotted out. So after he gets the full picture of what this Kinsman Redeemer redemption is going to look like, because, if he got the land, that's good for him because, that's a good deal. So we see here in verse 6, what is his decision going to be? And then the close relative said, I cannot redeem it for myself, lest I ruin my own inheritance. You redeem my right of redemption for yourself, for I cannot redeem it. So he says, now with this stipulation here of having Ruth, I can't do it. It'll ruin my inheritance. Literally meaning to corrupt or spoil or mar or destroy. So his inheritance. There's a good chance that he's probably married at this point in time as well as other kinsmen. And so bringing Ruth in there means that, he gets the land from Elimelech, but it's also that land's going to have to go to whoever he gets, whoever the child is that's born to Ruth. So he says, I can't do it. I can't afford it, is literally what he's saying. I can't afford to do this. If he gets the land, it would have been good, but, there's that catch, and he doesn't really want to do it that way. So he says, I can't do it. Boaz, you redeem. You redeem the land. You do the duty. So here we have the transaction that takes place. So in verse 7 it says, now this was the custom in the former times in Israel concerning the redeeming and exchanging, and to confirm anything, one man took off his sandal and gave it to the other. And this was the confirmation in Israel. So here we have in verse 7, the narrator comes back into the picture. So the book of Ruth was probably written anywhere between 100 and 200 years after these events. And we know that based on what we'll see at the very end of the book here. So, so it's at least 100 years, and by that particular time, whatever this transaction that took place with the sandals had come out of favor. It wasn't something that people knew. So if we were writing something nowadays about an event that took place at the turn of the 20th century, there might be some commentary that we'd have to say, well, back here, he had to do this because, this was the tradition in America at the turn of the 20th century. So there's different things. So the narrator's doing a similar kind of thing to the audience of the time that they're writing the book of Ruth. He's giving this information, saying this was the custom. And so this was the transfer of property. Back in Deuteronomy 25, it might have been something that came about as a result of those laws. In 25, where it talks about the widow coming up and taking the man's sandal off and spitting in his face and doing that particular thing. But it might have been more of that feet and shoes are sort of like a symbol of power. In Psalms, where it's talking about Messiah making his enemies his footstool, that same kind of thing, that feet are very much a symbol of power. Also, when Moses was at the burning bush in Exodus chapter 3, God tells him, remove your sandals for your unholy ground. That same kind of thing, once again, being in that kind of power, that area. So it could be several different ideas when I was looking at different commentaries on what that might mean. So he says, buy it for yourself, and they do this exchange. So verse 8 says, therefore the close relatives said to Boaz, buy it for yourself. So he took off his sandal. So that transaction's taking place. Now remember, there's at least 10 other people around them, but there's probably more. So they're all seeing this particular event. And Boaz said to the elders and all the people, so all the people that have gathered around in this area, he says, you are witnesses this day that I have bought all that Elimelech's, and all that was Chilon's, and all that was Mahlon's from the hand of Naomi. Moreover, Ruth the Moabitess, the widow of Mahlon, I have acquired as my wife, to perpetuate the name of the dead through the inheritance, that the name of the dead may not be cut off from among the brethren, and from the position at the gate. You are witnesses this day. So very similar to a wedding in a lot of ways too, even at this particular point, when you're in a wedding ceremony and the preacher, the pastor says, is there anybody here that objects to that, the union of this man and this woman? Because technically the people that are in attendance at a wedding are the witnesses to that marriage. They are part of that contract, at that point in time. So Boaz is doing a similar thing here with the elders and the people, saying, if there's any dispute that ever comes up in the future, if this other kinsman says, I actually really want the land, he says, there's at least 10 other people here that say otherwise, that you forego that. And since you forego that particular right, this is your witnesses. This is the notaries taking place. So he says, your witnesses, the elders, the people there. Boaz is going to buy everything that was Elimelech's, everything that was Chilon's, and everything that was Mahlon's. So everything is going to be redeemed. He's also taking the widow of Mahlon, who is Ruth, and she's going to be his wife. And they'll raise up an heir so that his name is not cut off from the nation of Israel. And so once again, he reaffirms, you are witnesses. So the people at the gate and the elders said, We are witnesses. The Lord make the woman who is coming to your house like Rachel and Leah, the two who built up the house of Israel, and make you prosper in Ephraim and be famous in Bethlehem. May your house be like the house of Perez and Tamar, who Tamar bore to Judah, because the offspring which the Lord will give you from this young woman. So the people at the gates, the elders there, they say, yes, we are witnesses. We affirm what's happened here. We agree with this transaction that's taken place. It was all legal. It was all set, and they give a blessing to Boaz, saying, may your house be like Rachel and Leah. Between Rachel and Leah and then their two concubines, you have 4 women, you had the 12 tribes of Israel. So he says, may your house be like the tribe of Israel itself as a whole, and have lots of kids. And then also be Ephraim, which is a place near Bethlehem. This is another name really for Bethlehem. May the name be famous in Bethlehem. And may your house be like the house of Perez that Judah and Tamar had. So they're giving this blessing. Remember, this is going to be his line. This is still, Perez is the line of Boaz, and we'll see that here in a second, that whole line. So they're giving this blessing saying, I hope you have a lot of kids, and that the genealogy just continues to go on and on. Bless this line. So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. And when he went into her, the Lord gave her conception, and she bore a son. So Boaz and Ruth are married, and she gets pregnant, and they get a son. And in a lot of ways, this is going to be Naomi's son, because this is continuing on their line. It's Boaz and Ruth, but it's technically for Naomi. So they have a son. And then the women said to Naomi, blessed be the Lord, who has not left you this day without a close relative, and may his name be famous in Israel. And may he be to you the restorer of life, and a nourisher in your old age. For your daughter-in-law who loves you, who is better to you than 7 sons, has bore him. So these are probably the same women that at the end of chapter 1 said, they were asking, is this Naomi that's coming back? And she says, don't call me Naomi, meaning pleasant. Call me Mara, because the Almighty has dealt bitterly with me. For I went out full, and the Lord has brought me home again empty. Why do you call me Naomi, since the Lord has testified against me, and the Almighty has afflicted me? So at the beginning of this journey, this new beginning that Naomi had, she was empty. She came back to Bethlehem. She was empty, and she was saddened. And now it's taken a 180-degree turn. It's going in the opposite direction. And so the same women that were saying, is this Naomi? Are the same ones that are saying, blessed be the Lord who has not left you this day without a close relative, that God took care of you. God took care of Naomi in this, in ways that she would probably never have imagined. And so they give this blessing to her that some of the things that they were worried about was an heir. They didn't have an heir. Her 2 sons were dead. They didn't have any children. The other issue they were having was they didn't really have food. They had Ruth going to the fields to get the food. Now you have somebody that will be able to sustain her and keep her in old age. And then they give her this blessing saying that her daughter-in-law, Ruth, is better than 7 sons. And in Israel, if you had 7 sons, that was like perfection. That was like the best thing you could ever have, was having 7 sons. And they're saying Ruth was better than having 7 sons. And so then Naomi took the child and laid him on her bosom and became a nurse to him. So Naomi is taking care of her son, Obed, is what his name is going to be called. So the neighbor women gave him a name saying, there's a son born to Naomi. So once again, talking about Naomi, Ruth is the one that physically had this child, but it's Naomi's son. And they called him Obed. And he is the father of Jesse, the father of David. So the name Obed means serving. And so here we have, now going in, once again, this takes place, this book was written over 100 years, before, this event took place, so 100 years before the book was finished. So we have this genealogy, and this is where it becomes important. And you might say, genealogy, go to Ancestry.com and search things. Well, this is a pretty important genealogy. So we have this genealogy, the last few verses. It says, now this is the genealogy of Perez. Once again, the people of the town had said, be like Perez that Judah and Tamar had. So this is the genealogy of Perez. Perez begot Hezron. Hezron begot Ram. Ram begot Abimadab. Abimadab begot Nahshon. Nahshon begot Salem. Salem begot Boaz. And Boaz begot Obed. Obed begot Jesse. And Jesse begot David. Alright, so that's the genealogy in Ruth. If we were to look at a little bit longer genealogy, I'm going to read from Matthew's Gospel, chapter 1. This goes back a little bit further beforehand. Abraham begot Isaac. Isaac begot Jacob, also known as Israel. And Jacob begot Judah and his brothers. Judah begot Perez. And Zerah begot, by Tamar. Perez begot Haran. Haran begot Ram. Ram begot Abinadab. Abinadab begot Nahshon. Nahshon begot Salem. This is an interesting point here. Salem begot Boaz by Rahab. You read the book of Joshua, that's the same Rahab. So Boaz's mother is Rahab, who was a Canaanite. Boaz begot Obed by Ruth, a Moabitess. And Obed begot Jesse, and Jesse begot David, the king. King David. David the king begot Solomon by her who had been the wife of Uriah. Solomon begot Rehoboam. Rehoboam begot Azabon. Azabon begot Asa. Asa begot Jehoshaphat. Jehoshaphat begot Joram. Joram begot Uriah. Uriah begot Jatham. Jatham begot Raza. Raza begot Hezekiah. Hezekiah begot Manasseh. Manasseh begot Ammon. Ammon begot Josiah. Josiah begot Jehoiakim. Jehoiakim and his brothers about the time that they were carried away into Babylon. At the time that they were brought to Babylon, Jehoiakim begot Shallum. Shallum begot Zerubbabel. Zerubbabel begot Ehud. Ehud begot Elikam. Elikam begot Azor. Azor begot Zelek. Zelek begot Achem. Achem begot Elud. Elud begot Eleazar. Eleazar begot Mathan. Mathan begot Jacob. And Jacob begot Joseph, the husband of Mary, of whom was born Jesus, who is called Christ. So here we have why Ruth is an important story. Here we had a family from Bethlehem go to the land of Moab, maybe outside of what they were supposed to do. But through the events, the death of Elimelech, Mahlon, Chilion, the bringing back into to Bethlehem of Ruth with Naomi, the way that God orchestrated this all together, we have the genealogy of Christ, and we have Naomi and Ruth and Rahab even in this genealogy that leads up to our Savior. Throughout church history, when people look at the book of Ruth, they look at it as a foretelling of Christ, Christ being our kinsman redeemer. He is our redeemer. He redeemed us when we were strangers, when we were aliens, when we were foreigners, and he brought us back to himself. He redeemed us while we were still sinners. As the Apostle Paul would write in a couple of his letters, in Galatians chapter 4, verses 4 through 7, he writes, "But when the fullness of time had come, God sent forth his Son, born of a woman, born under the law, to redeem those who were under the law, that we might receive adoption as sons. And because you are sons of God, God has sent forth the Spirit of his Son into your hearts, crying out, Abba, Father. Therefore you are no longer slaves, but a son, and if a son, then an heir of God through Christ. That we have been redeemed. Christ is our kinsman redeemer, and he redeemed us, not with a sandal, but with his own blood on a cross. He is our kinsman redeemer. He brought us out of the darkness into his glorious light. So as you go through this life, we don't know if our paths are going to take us through Moab and back to Bethlehem. We don't know what trials we might go through. We don't know what situations we are. But we have a Redeemer. His name is Jesus Christ. He has redeemed us, more so than any transaction that took place. That's a transaction that has eternal payment. That we're saved from sin, from death, from hell, because of Jesus Christ, our kinsman redeemer. Let's pray. Dearly Father, thank you, Lord, for being our kinsman redeemer. Thank you for going to the cross. It didn't cost money, it cost blood. I thank you so much that you have redeemed us. Not just to be pulled out of the slavery of sin, but to call us your child. We can call you Abba, Father, or Daddy. I thank you so much, Lord, that we have the privilege to be heirs with God and joint heirs with Christ, that we are your children. I thank you that you have redeemed us. Help us to share that redemption story with everyone that we pass. Help us, give us the passion that we need. Help us to give us the words, the wisdom, as we reach out into this world that so desperately needs to be redeemed. I thank you that you have redeemed us. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Amen.